I just want to, together we can get this done. Thank you to Representative Rosa DeLauro, who says that she joins her Senate colleagues on calling on Robert Califf, the new FDA commissioner, and to remove all not yet reviewed products from the market immediately. We certainly echo that. And before I introduce our honored panelists for this next really important and interesting conversation about new products, I just want to say, remind people that thanks to our sponsor, one of our lead sponsors and partners, the Campaign for Tobacco-Free Kids, you can send a message to FDA urging them to no more delay. Take those products off the market, both now, because you can, until you finish the PMTA process, and don't delay it by another year. You can go to, I think it's takedowntobacco.org/PAVE, PAVE, and you can send your own message and then tweet it out. So now it really is my pleasure to welcome the following panelists for this conversation called Flavor of the Month. Well, maybe we should have called it Flavor of the Week, because the industry is moving so quickly, unfortunately. Flavor of the Month: Emerging Products, Synthetic Nicotine, and Youth Use. And we have with us Dr. Bonnie Halpern-Felsher, Professor of Pediatrics at Stanford University, who is also founder and executive director of the Tobacco Prevention Toolkit. And I'm very proud to say she was our founding PAVE advisory board member and is now on PAVE's board. So welcome, Bonnie. And another very early partner of PAVE's, Dr. Achala Talati, Director of Tobacco Policy and Programs at the New York City Department of Health. So welcome, Achala. And then also Richard Trumka, who is Commissioner of the U.S. Consumer Product Safety Commissioner. And so I guess we'll jump right in. Thanks to you all for being here. And I'm going to start with Bonnie. I'm going to use first names. We all know each other well, if that's okay. Commissioner, I hope you're okay with that too. But Bonnie, I want to just sort of put in context, and then I'm going to toss it over to you. You have some really exciting new research. One piece that is looking at the youth use of nicotine flavored e-cigarettes. The most recent federal figures from the NYTS, the National Youth Tobacco Survey, the last version of that, which is already outdated, right? We believe that the new raw data for the 2022 will be coming in. So many of us, as we speak to teachers and parents and organizations around the country, the number that we had in 2021, FDA told us that that number should not be indicative of a downward trend because it was conducted during the lockdown. The methodology was different. That number said that there were 2 million teens regularly vaping. That's 2 million too many. That's still an enormous number. But you have some new data that suggests what I think we all instinctively know, which is that the new figures are much higher. I think we heard that from some of the school panels earlier when they talked about what the schools are experiencing on the ground. And then secondly, they're going to share with us some literally hot off the press, I think as of today, data, and I'll let you share it and talk about it, about youth use of non-nicotine e-cigarettes, including something that we've been very concerned about and have been talking a lot about, which are these flavored non-nicotine e-cigs making wellness claims and for which there is no regulatory authority, right? So Bonnie, I'm going to hand it to you first, and then I'll turn to our other panelists for response and more questions. Thanks.
Beautiful. Thank you so much, Meredith. And hi, everyone. I'm super happy to be here. Hopefully you can see my slides. I don't mean to make this super formal, but as an academic, I tend to do slides, but wanted to share with you our latest data and absolutely what Meredith was saying. Just a quick shout out to my lab, and particularly just the authors of the papers I'm going to share with you today in our lab. And then always have to give a shout out to our funders, as everybody's been doing for the past 2 days in this amazing conference. And then I do need a pause, though, just to make sure that everybody knows that I am an expert scientist in some litigation against e-cigarette companies and an unpaid expert in some city, state, and federal level policies and advocacy work. So I am required to make that disclosure. All right, so what are we talking about? So I do want to share with you the new data that Meredith referred to, because I think it's really important to put in context the national data that we're seeing right now, that the latest, the 2021 numbers showing about 11% of high school students using e-cigarettes. And even though the federal government has made the disclaimer that we shouldn't be hanging our hat on those numbers, unfortunately, the e-cigarette companies, the tobacco industry are and saying, hey, we don't have a problem anymore. Look how low the numbers are. Well, we know, PAVE knows, we know, parents know, educators. In my role in the toolkit, we go talk to thousands of schools throughout the country, and everybody's saying those numbers are ridiculous. They are way higher. So we did a study to look at how much higher. So I'm going to show you that, and then some data on the non-nicotine. So our survey that we launched in November and December of 2021, we surveyed over 6,000 13 to 40-year-olds, and it is a national online study. So the date's really important because the NYTS data were conducted about 8 months earlier in the fall, winter, spring of 2021. So when students were still largely sheltering and at home, whereas our data were collected when students were back in school. And I think that's a big thing. So what are the differences that we're seeing? First, just for general e-cigarette use, the NYTS data showing about 19% of all students using a nicotine e-cigarette. We're showing 32.9. Now, by the way, very, very, very important. The data I'm about to show you right now are preliminary. They're not published. They're hot off of our computers. So these may change a little bit. We are submitting the paper for publication this week, but I do have to have that caveat. But still, we're seeing in that 13 to 17-year-old, closer to 33% of students who have used an e-cigarette. And then you can see even higher numbers if you go older. If we're looking at past 30-day use, which is what NYTS talks about, that's your 11.3%. Past 30-day use among all students, we're showing closer to 21% if you look at that middle high school age. And compared to all students, when the NYTS of 7.6%, we're again seeing almost 21%, much, much higher numbers, much closer to what we were seeing when our federal government was calling it a vaping epidemic. And then for past 30-day use, just among those who have ever used, again, our numbers are almost double what the NYTS numbers are. And I just want to show you one more piece here around the typical, when we say regular smokers or regular vapors or people who are using on a fairly regular basis, that's defined as using 20 out of the past 30 days. There, our numbers are a little bit lower than what we were seeing with the NYTS data. That could be sampling, but I don't have the data here. But if you look at the number of youth who are using daily in our data set, it's very, very high. So the point here is we have a lot of youth who are using e-cigarettes in various forms, various flavors, and they are using them pretty regularly, and we largely because of addiction. And I do want to point out that the products that they're most likely to be using in this age range, and Meredith talks about this, Meredith and I have gone on, and we had this in our publication last year, we're seeing it again, it's the disposables, and these are the products that are exempt from the current FDA discretionary enforcement. So we need, as soon as that happened in early 2020, where pods, particularly Juul, where the FDA did enforcement against those products, youth just turned towards the next product, disposables. Flavors, not surprising, we're seeing a lot of sweet, dessert, fruit, and mint and menthol again. But I want to point out that a lot of people are using fruit, and they're using fruit in pod-based products, even though that's supposedly been regulated. So there's still, and I asked that to youth, can you get mango? Oh yeah, it's not hard to get. They're still getting these flavored products and they're using them.
Bonnie, can I ask you one quick question? I don't want, this is a conversational, so this is really, this sort
Yeah,
of,
and I apologize for being so
no,
lecturing.
but I mean, I think all of us on this call are very, very interested in seeing this. Do you ask about iced flavors? And we can get into that later as one of the sort of new products. Do you ask that question? Because the federal survey won't be able to even ask that. And iced flavors, for those who don't know, are menthol. They're menthol mixed with a fruit or a candy flavor. I've even seen iced mint. It's like menthol and mint. And they won't ask that in the federal survey until 2023.
Right. So that's actually the next slide right here. Yeah, so we do. And in the publication we had last year, which I can send around, and Meredith, you have that paper, you're welcome to share it with people, that we published last year on addictive behavior. It does talk about ICE. And here again, yes, in our latest data, we do have data on ICE, and you're looking right here amongst the younger age group. 10, and the reason why, by the way, we break it down to 13 to 20 is even 20-year-olds, even though they're young adults, they're still below the age in which they should be able to be sold tobacco products, which is the age of 21. So we're seeing 10% using and saying that they're using some form of an ICE product. Overall, we're seeing, if you look at that menthol, 22%. And what you discussed in the last hour, your last panel, is exactly the problem. Young people of all ages, but particularly that 13 to 20-year-old group, are using menthol and they're using ICE, and that's very concerning.
Bonnie, is it fair to add together, and again, I'm not a scientist, as you well know, and I'm not a researcher, but I mean, what we have thought is that, and I know we've had this conversation both with Achala and with Richard as well, if we look at what the federal figures say about, we know menthol is among the most popular. If you were to take in your survey, if is ICE is also menthol. So can you say that menthol overall, if you look at menthol, pure menthol, and we'll talk later, Achala, I know about the synthetic menthol, which is terrifying. But if you look at menthol overall, and then you break out, you look at ICE, if you add them together, does that show that the use of actual menthol, meaning a combination, I know you couldn't do this technically in your research, but from a translational perspective, can we say that the use of menthol is even higher if you're asking about ICE because that's a mentholated flavor, or is that not relevant in this conversation?
So I'm sorry, Meredith.
If it wasn't clear, let's move on and we'll discuss.
Yeah. So we only can disaggregate as far as we ask the question. So basically what you're seeing here, I can go back, like I said, this is great timing because we're about to submit the paper. So we'll get a sense of the questions that the audience and you all are looking for so we can analyze the data accordingly. There was a question about middle versus high school. Yes, we will disaggregate further. We just haven't had a chance to do it.
Right.
So maybe Meredith,
we'll move on. We can move on. I think the one question where someone said we're not familiar with ICE, hopefully we explained that well, that it's a mentholated flavor that mixes menthol with a fruit flavor or a candy flavor, iced raspberry, iced melon.
Watermelon, watermelon ice,
Okay, so we'll move on. Sorry about that.
No worries. And I pointed that out. And again, so let's just go to the key takeaways, and then I want to go to the hot off the press. So again, these are still preliminary data and not published, but really what we're seeing is that this age group, those under the age of 21, are using e-cigarette devices and flavors that have been exempted by the FDA's 2020 prioritized enforcement. So they're using disposables such as Puff Bar, Flume, all the new products that are on the market. They're still using menthol. They're using menthol. I cannot say that enough. But they're also using flavored pod products because we asked them that, and that'll be in the paper. We disaggregate in very detailed tables. So they are using these flavored pods, and they're able to find them. So we really need more action to address underage e-cigarette use, and we have to stop this whack-a-mole, which is the press release we had last year, this whack-a-mole on one product at a time when youth just move over to a different product or a different flavor.
They're using menthol, they're using menthol, they're using menthol. We're going to keep repeating that for the rest of today and onward. People will be very bored of hearing us say that.
Yeah.
Okay,
No,
next.
they are. All right, so the hot off the press, these have been published. So if you're not familiar with these non-nicotine, so we've been trying to really push and advocate for calling these non-nicotine e-cigarettes, not wellness products, because wellness, even though if we put it in quotes, that implies that we are endorsing that term, and we are not. These are harmful products. They may not have nicotine in them, but they do have caffeine, vitamin B, melatonin. Those in and of themselves are not the concerning part. It's the fact that you're heating flavors, propylene glycol, glycerin, flavorants, aldehydes, and you're inhaling that. That is where we're concerned about these products. So we published a study. I'll put the link in the chat. It literally got published today. So very good timing, because otherwise I would not be allowed to talk about it, in JAMA Network Open. And basically the high level, and again, I'll share the paper with you in the link in a minute, that non-nicotine e-cigarette use in this same sample of over 300 13 to 40-year-olds, almost 26% had ever used one of these products, almost 17% used in the past 30 days, and about 12% in the past 7 days. So who are these? Let's go by ages. We're seeing in the 13 to 17-year-olds, 14% ever used and almost 7% in the past 30 days. And the numbers go up with age from there. But why are we concerned? You may be saying, but the young ones aren't using. Well, overall, if you look at the 13 to 20, again, these are adolescents and young adults that we're talking about in this conference for 2 days. Those under the age of 21, we're still seeing a significant proportion of adolescents and young adults using these products. Also, these are similar numbers to not only what happened in 2018 when the vaping pandemic term came out, but even in 2016, we saw 16% of youth using e-cigarettes, nicotine e-cigarettes. The Surgeon General said we had a public health crisis. So we are still seeing 1 in 4, 1 in 5 youth using these non-nicotine products, and they're new. They're new on the market. So we're very concerned that we're just going to see an uptick in use. Let's talk about a little bit more about these. We're seeing a large proportion who've used both nicotine and non-nicotine, and they tried the non-nicotine first. So around age 15 is the average age across our entire sample, 13 to 40, that they're saying that they used it younger, and then they moved to a nicotine e-cigarette. So a lot of concern there too. The ingredients that are used, they're using THC, absolutely, but they're using melatonin, essential oils, flowers. They're using all kinds of ingredients in these products. And not surprising, they're using fruit, dessert, and guess what? Mint and menthol as well. The other thing, the other thing to note, I didn't bring in the numbers, but when you look at the paper, what's also concerning is a lot of people, and particularly the younger people, don't know what's in their products. They don't know what they're using. This is the problem with, as Meredith said, some of the claims where they talk about health claims or wellness claims, but also young people, just like with nicotine e-cigarettes, are sharing their products. So they don't know what they're using, and it's up to us to help them and protect them, because there's mislabeling, there's misinformation that's going out there. So just to end with, and Meredith, you have these and are welcome to share them. We do have infographics. This one is for adults and for parents and schools. You're welcome to use these. They're completely free to be able to use. And then we have one for youth that we titled Don't Inhale BS, where we're trying to really get this word out. And I am done. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Bonnie. So there's a lot there to unpack. And as you said, it was just published this morning, just a couple of, less than 2 hours ago in the JAMA Open Network. Is that right?
JAMA Network Open.
JAMA Network Open. So I just want to, as a parent, translate some of what I heard, right? Probably, hopefully not wrong, as I asked a confusing question. And by the way, I think it was Stan Glantz in the chat with the questions who said there are some ice compounds that are not menthol. But when we were talking about iced flavors, we are talking about mentholated flavors here. So, but I just want to point that out. So these non-menthol products, non-nicotine products, I only knew about it because, and this almost tracks with your data, my then 13-year-old, now 14, had said to me, can I get it, Mom, who knows what I do. Mom, can I get a melatonin diffuser? I think it will help me fall asleep. I thought she meant like one of those Nest with the sticks and it'll relax her. And I said, well, let me just look online. And I actually went on Amazon and I was shocked and horrified. These look like they look like Juuls. They look like Puff Bars. They look like the big kid, let's call it, unfortunately, vapes. And I'm sure that's not an accident. So this is a real problem because as Bonnie's data shows, if you have, the 14% of the 13 to 17 say they've ever used, another one of my kids who's a little older, who's 20, said, oh, Mom, those ads where they talk about how this will be good for your energy or this will be good to relax you, all of these claims and all of the fabulous flavors is all over TikTok. I see it all the time. And the concern is that the companies, someone asked the question, the big issue is, and let's turn this to Richard, no one is regulating these products. These are not being regulated by FDA because supposedly they are non-nicotine products, although some of them seem to be like love compatible with a Juul. So therefore, arguably, we have to make sure FDA is aware that if it's compatible with a Juul nicotine pod, it would be under FDA authority. But Richard, no one is regulating these. They fall in this gray zone. And yet, as Bonnie said, they're using the high heat and PGVG, the propylene glycol and the vegetable glycerin and aldehydes and flavorings. They're making completely unsubstantiated health claims. We don't even know what's in them. And maybe the worst thing is it's normalizing the vaping behavior for younger adolescents. Again, as Bonnie said, her data shows that the young people may be starting with those before moving on to the nicotine vapes, right, Bonnie? So Richard, in your position as commissioner of the Consumer Product Safety, as a commissioner, the Consumer Product Safety Commission, who has authority over these? This is really concerning, isn't it?
I mean, it is. And Bonnie, your research on this is so incredibly important because you're keeping up with what's actually happening and putting numbers to it and making sure we understand this. I'm shocked that these numbers are this high. And I think if I can go back to the first part of what you talked about, the menthol side, and tying back into the last panel, the FDA should be acting on that right now. I absolutely agree with that sentiment. Before this role, I was with the House Oversight Committee and we worked with Meredith and Pave a lot. And one of the last hearings that I had was a year ago, and it was with Janet Woodcock, and she testified as acting FDA commissioner. And she testified that if any flavors were left on the market, including menthol, kids would flock to them. That menthol in e-cigarettes makes them more addictive, that high nicotine e-cigarettes led to youth addiction, and the Juul was responsible for the youth vaping epidemic. She laid that out a year ago, all the reasons why FDA should have rejected on September 9th every remaining PMTA. But we're still waiting on the big ones there. But in terms of the non-nicotine, you mentioned a gray area. I don't think one exists, and I will explain why. The CPSC's had a pretty limited role in this space until now. I mean, pretty much we just enforced the Child Nicotine Poisoning Prevention Act, which makes it so kids can't, the packaging safe so kids can't drink the e-liquid and die. But I will give you this example to show you what I mean by the lack of a gray area here. And I think very few people know that CPSC earlier this year came very close to becoming Puff Bar's regulator. And when I came over to CPSC, one of the first things I did was read our laws, and I focused in on our jurisdictional section. And we've got jurisdiction over all consumer products. And that is except for a handful of explicit carve-outs that are enumerated in our act. And, for example, cars go to NHTSA, and of relevance, tobacco products and drugs go to FDA. And we all know that Puff Bar was trying to avoid being a tobacco product or a drug, but in its attempt to flee FDA jurisdiction, I think it stepped right into ours at CPSC. And I had enough conversations with FDA to know that they weren't going to be able to regulate a Puff Bar with their existing authority. So we started preparing our case against Puff Bar, and we let FDA know, Department of Justice knew, relevant congressional committees. We just want to make sure that Puff Bar is regulated one way or the other. And either we would do it at CPSC or that prospect would nudge Congress to give FDA authority. And I think we know that's what happened now. But if Congress had done nothing there, CPSC could have sued under our Section 12 authority, and that gives us the right to immediately remove imminently hazardous consumer products from the market. So we get an injunction right off the bat there, and the ability to seize product off store shelves and at points of entry. And we now know that Congress put that in the synthetic jurisdiction in an appropriations bill shortly after those conversations were happening. We're glad there's a path forward on synthetic. I think FDA is going to handle it. It's very disappointing that those ridiculously long timelines, the delays were baked into the law so that FDA can't clear the market of synthetics until July 13th. But I hope they act decisively on that day. But that's all kind of a long windup to say there's no air between our jurisdiction and FDA's jurisdiction on this. If it's not FDA, it's us. And if it's not us, it's FDA. And so with these non-nicotine vapes, it's definitely one of us. And if it's not a drug, a tobacco product, or a component or part, then it's CPSC. And you've got commissioners here who very much care about the topic. I mean, Commissioner Feldman drafted the Child Nicotine Poisoning Prevention Act while he was at Senate Commerce. So you've got people over here that know the issues and care.
Well, that's great. I'm really glad to hear that. I mean, I know that about you, and I'm glad to hear that, of course, about your colleagues as well, because Richard, someone is asking, for the non-nicotine products, are retailers not supposed to sell under 21 the same as nicotine products? And I'd like to ask that question as well, because first of all, some of the largest players in this space are companies like Ripple, RIPPLE, which is a British company, Monk, MONQ, and Cloudy, CLOUDY. Now I think it's Ripple, it may be Monk. These products are sold over the counter at Urban Outfitters, a public company. I have seen on some of these websites, they say 18. On some of them, they say 21, but there's no age verification because I have been going online. My kids have been going online. You can buy them on Amazon. I mean, Richard, I guess I would say, or Achla, do these products, maybe Achla, I'll ask you because you can talk about New York City. But are these products, is there there should be age verification, but what is the age? Or because they're not being regulated, although listening to Richard, I'm hoping that they will soon be, because clearly, as our scientists have said, these are harmful. We know even without nicotine, vaping is harmful, certainly to developing lungs, right? So who knows the answer about age and what the age would be or should be? Or is there no age on these since no one's regulating them currently? I'll just toss it to you.
I'll defer. I mean, the federal legislation, it ties to whether they're nicotine based, whether they fit in the definition of ends. So I don't think they'd be under the T21, and I'm not sure at all the state levels how they define it, but my guess is there's not the same type of age restriction on these.
And Achla, talking about, from a city perspective, and then after you answer that, I want to actually get you to talk about the creative definitions that you have been able to help advocate for and your colleagues in New York City about what counts as an e-cig. Would that be, for example, in New York City, where is there an age on a product like that?
Yeah, there is actually, because our definition of e-cigarettes is really broad and it's not specifically tied to nicotine or tobacco. So these products would be included in our local laws, and that includes our local age restriction.
Which is 21.
Which is 21, yes.
And so therefore, these products would be illegal in New York City, or they would not be able to be sold, even though they do not have nicotine based on the flavoring in New York City?
Yeah, so because e-cigarettes are defined pretty broadly here, so that means retailers.
Can you give us what that definition is? And there may be colleagues from other cities who might get some great ideas from listening to how you've defined it.
Sure, happy to share it in the chat afterwards, but basically it's just relying on the fact, of the type of product it is. So it's like a electronic product that creates an aerosol for inhalation. So anything that kind of fits into that definition will be included. And so retailers would have to have a local license to sell products, even if they don't contain nicotine. And they would also have to follow other local laws, like you were mentioning, in terms of the local sales ban on flavored products. So, even some of these like personal diffusers or non-nicotine e-cigarettes, they would still be included. And so people who do live in New York City, parents, families, anyone who works with youth, if you're hearing about places where these products are sold, you can actually file complaints, that'll result in us sort of, in our sister agencies reviewing some of those records and potentially inspecting those retailers if they feel like, they're violating local laws.
What about online? Because a lot of these, so we mentioned Urban Outfitters is selling these both online and in the store, which I know from my daughter. So that would be a federal issue, right, Richard? But under the PACT Act, which maybe we can, and I don't want to mangle it, but maybe somebody could, maybe Richard, you could give as our commissioner, you can sort of translate exactly what the PACT Act. But my understanding is that any kind of e-cigarette, and under the PACT Act, this would count, right, as an e-cigarette, so that the US Postal Service would say, I mean, I ordered them through the mail, and that's illegal as well. So is that correct? And how do people, if people want to make change, how do they make something happen, there?
Yeah, so the PACT Act is, there's a U.S. Postal Service regulation that implements that, and they do have a broader definition. It sounds like potentially like the one that New York City uses. It includes nicotine, flavoring, or any other substance in an aerosolized implement. So I think that would be problematic, that it would apply to these, and I would point them to the U.S. Postal Service to make any complaints where there was an issue with that.
The easiest way. So do we all agree in our different areas? I'm speaking as a parent with young adolescents who are drawn to these products because they're telling them some of the claims are, you can focus more, and you can relax more easily, and you can have more romance. I mean, all kinds of absurd, unsubstantiated claims. It's all about the flavorings at the high heat, which we know is harmful. It'll irritate the cilia of your lungs and could do much worse. Do we all agree that this category, which, as we said, Bonnie's breaking news, that there's actually quite a significant number of adolescents who are using them? Do we think this is a real concern? And again, how do we take action or promote action? And Richard, on that one, I'm sort of looking at you because it sounds like you and your colleagues could potentially make something happen, but is that the right thing to do?
Yeah. Here's what I'd say. When we're looking at whether to regulate a product, step one's always understanding the prevalence. So we want to understand how many people are affected by an issue so we can prioritize it. This is, Dr. Bonnie, you absolutely put useful and really significant information on that front in front of us today. So we will take a close look at your study on that. And I think step two is we need to establish that there's a hazard that the product poses. I think we could still use help there. And so the public can submit any relevant studies, any information to CPSC to help with that determination. Anything about each of the components, about the propylene glycol, about vegetable glycerin, any other ingredients you're aware of that are in these things, send them to us. I'm happy to have us review those. And certainly if there are any individual injuries or any individual issues that come up, we've got a website, saferproducts.gov, that you can report those to, so we can start seeing how many people are affected. If you're having a negative health outcome from these things, that helps us start tracking that.
And Achala, have you heard, and then I'm gonna go back to Bonnie on the science. Achala, have you heard of any poison control calls, or, how concerned are you about these products, these flavored vapes that, look like Juul and Puff Bar and the gang, and are all over the place without age verification? Are you concerned about those?
Yeah, definitely. I don't think we have any specific data like from poison control, but one thing that we were doing was following up with all New York City residents who had lung injuries, who had a volley, in 2019, to sort of see how they were doing. Were there any sort of long-term issues or symptoms that they were having related to their lung injuries? And that was actually one of the first times I heard about how some of these non-nicotine e-cigarettes were being marketed, because one of those people actually reported, and I think she was actually kind of proud of herself, because she was like, I switched and I'm not using nicotine vaping products anymore. And I'm using one of these, nicotine-free vaping products because it was really marketed that way on social media. And so she thought she was doing something that was, safer for her lungs. So I think these products are definitely being, marketed in a way to appeal to people, maybe even people who've had negative side effects or adverse effects from using some of the other vaping products and nicotine vaping products. So I think it's definitely concerning.
I just want to very quickly, and then there's some great stuff in the chat that I just want to bring up. You mentioned, Atala, going back and talking to people who had reported EVALI. So I just want to quickly, it's when we had an earlier conversation, I think prepping for this, you mentioned, and we talked about this very briefly yesterday in a conversation with Stan Glantz about health harms, that EVALI is no longer, as we know, because of COVID and perhaps other reasons, no longer being tracked on a weekly basis by the CDC, right? So there was a lot of focus on the thousands of cases, right? I think the last one was February 2020. And so now we hear things or we see them reported. How often are you seeing in New York City, for example, how many cases of EVALI are you getting reports of every year?
Yeah, we are definitely continuing to see cases. I think the large outbreak was in 2019 and kind of peaked in September of that year, but we're still continuing to see like a few cases every month. And that's just, in New York City. So across the whole country, that is likely a pretty substantial number. And I think it's also being underreported. That's based on what we're able to find and what people are reporting to us. So, that number might even be larger. And I think, also a lot of jurisdictions across the country right now are, changing regulations for recreational cannabis use, for adult use. And so like that plays into that as well. And so I think it's definitely something that we should continue to be concerned about and make sure providers know about. And in New York State, there was a notification sent out to providers recently, a couple of months ago, just reminding them that this is still happening and that they should continue to report these cases as well.
Right. Well, we hear these cases from parents all the time, but but unless it's reported through the proper channels, it's considered just anecdotal, but it's quite a lot of anecdotes. I'm just going to read a few things in the chat. Someone says, Richard, this is probably for you. So anyone have thoughts on the possibility that Congress took action to give FDA authority over synthetic nicotine products, which was talked about earlier, because the industry lobbied for it? Well, we know it was bipartisan in Congress, which is a good thing, but knowing they could delay action there versus getting their products ripped from the shelves by the CPSC. I like how that person's mind works, by the way, because any thoughts about that, Richard?
No, I sure hope not, but I don't know.
Right. Well, the industry is certainly, as we have talked about for days now, they're very duplicitous, so you never know. But we appreciate that Congress took action when they did, obviously, because it's a very serious issue. And someone else is saying, do these wellness vapes, and again, also because it was a bipartisan effort, because this whole issue of protecting kids from these products and big tobacco must be a nonpartisan issue. Do these wellness vapes fall under the synthetic FDA ruling? And the answer for that would be no, because the definition is about synthetic nicotine. They say, do we have to go back again and get a ruling for these wellness vapes? It's probably a little too early for that. The first research on this, we're very honored that Bonnie actually broke here today. So there may not be, is that right? It's a little too early.
Well, and also the Center for Tobacco Products is tobacco and anything that falls under tobacco. So currently, these, unless somebody does the pharmacological aspects of these and takes them apart, which we're hoping somebody will do, so far these products don't have nicotine in any form. They're still vaping products or e-cigarette products and have, like I said, all the other things that we're concerned about: propylene glycol, glycerin, flavorants, and aldehydes, et cetera, et cetera. But so I would imagine that's why having Richard, you here, is so important, because the fact that they would not fall under the Center for Tobacco Products.
Right. I just want to say also, I think William Lynch, who I think is with the National Association of Attorneys General, he just put in here, and we'll have to all look at it later. He says, as of April 30th, 2022, he gives us the link. Poison control centers have managed almost 2,000 exposure cases about e-cigarette devices and liquid nicotine in 2022. I don't know the breakout of how many are non-nicotine. I want to, and we may have lost Achala, hopefully she'll come back on. I also want to go to sort of other new products. We talked about synthetic nicotine. There are I think that the main point is that the tobacco industry is shape-shifting so quickly. We talked in the last panel about menthol, for example, and the really important news that menthol cigarettes, according to FDA, although it's 2023 and it should have been years ago, but we're so grateful that those products will be taken off the market. And we're extremely concerned about menthol e-cigs remaining on the market, even during the PMTA process, because we already know from the outdated federal surveys, and at the end, we'll return again to Bonnie's latest figures that show that what we all really sort of knew, which is this is a much bigger problem than it was going back up, unfortunately. But Achla, you and I have discussed, there were some recent research showing that there's even a new way, new reports about synthetic menthol. So we already know from FDA how dangerous menthol is, which is why they should not leave menthol e-cigs on the market. But what can we do about things like these synthetic menthol? Can you tell us about that?
Yeah, sure. So I think, and maybe this is what some folks I think in the Q&A or chat might have been alluding to too, is that there are synthetic sort of cooling agents. So they generate sort of similar sensory experience that menthol would, even though they're not menthol. And so I think this is really important to think about now when this comment period is open for menthol cigarettes and also for this product standard for flavored cigars. Because it's an opportunity to potentially like define, how are they defining characterizing flavor? How are they defining flavors? Can they restrict certain ingredients completely? And so, I just encourage everyone to potentially look at those product standards and try to comment on that. And because we want the definition to really be as robust as possible. We know from experience that the tobacco industry will take any leeway they have to sort of try to sell, flavored products in any way that they can. I know in New York City, when we first banned the sale of flavored products, we saw concept flavors arise really quickly. So, instead of grape, we saw purple, things like that, became really widespread. And so we know the industry has that kind of history. So trying to ensure that these definitions are really like as tight as possible and that we're inclusive of all of these types of ingredients that we know are flavored and potentially other products and related chemicals and, things in the future that might not even exist yet. So, something to think about to try to make those definitions as strict as we possibly can.
Thank you. And Bonnie, because we're going to be unfortunately wrapping up, but we could talk about this all day. And I would love to, if everyone is, well, I'm not free, we have the conference, but I guess what I would love to know. So Bonnie, first of all, I want to thank you for presenting this really important information, both the information that you will be submitting for publication about, which is no surprise, but maybe you'll just reiterate the numbers again, what your figures show about youth use of vaping nicotine products. And also, again, what are you most worried about? I mean, and I want to say that we are concerned about these non-nicotine flavored vapes because we believe that they normalize the behavior of vaping with younger adolescents. And then we know what's great on. I hear your lovely dogs in the background right now. But Bonnie, so what are your concerns? And then I'll end with you about what can we do?
Absolutely. And I apologize. Yeah, semi-typical, working from home. So can you hear me though?
Yes.
Yes. So good. Okay, good. Also, I by accident clicked answer wrong in the for the toolkits. I'm putting the toolkits into the website. I'm concerned. I'm concerned about e-cigarettes and vaping being normalized. I'm very concerned about that. When I talk to teens throughout the country, they're saying, we're all doing it. Whatever it is we're using, we're all using something. And there's a huge amount of pressure. Shh, boys, 2 little 5-pounders make a lot of noise.
In their warriors outfits.
Yeah, they're with me in this. So I'm very, very concerned. I'm concerned that we're seeing, 14 to 20%, 25% of underage youth using these products. I will tell you, we do have data on access of these non-nicotine e-cigarettes. We do have data on the messaging, so the wellness claims and other things and how youth perceive those. So those are, we're working hard to get the papers out. We hope to have those submitted soon. And then also what you were talking about with the other non-nicotine, non-inhaled like pouches and gum, we have those as well. in our data set that we'll be submitting. Also in the paper, so I'm bouncing, but quickly, in the paper we just published this morning, the products that youth are using most often are in those as well. I just didn't want to mention those here in the interest of time.
Thank you, Bonnie. And Richard, I'm going to end with you. What can people do? What do parents do? I mean, I think you said first, like, we're so sick of this whack-a-mole, but what do we do? I mean, it sounds like potentially we can do something about these non-nicotine, wellness e-cigarettes, but what would you say? I mean, having been in Congress and, working on the Raja Krishnamurthy's team that went after Juul, and now as a commissioner, what would you say to parents and educators and others who want to take action? What can we do?
Well, let me start with what's crystal clear and what FDA should do today, and that is clear the market of all menthol e-cigarettes that are still outstanding for their PMTAs, all high nicotine e-cigarettes, and all Juul products. And they should do that today before they wait till 2023, the timeline that they gave themselves there. That should happen a while ago, and it certainly should happen as soon as it can. In terms of what parents can do to be proactive, I pointed out a couple of the things, and I'll point out one more. Carol Magruder talked about the timelines on that citizen petition that ended up, getting menthol cigarettes banned. Those are, it's a travesty that a citizen's petition with that substance would take that long to rule on. I love citizens petitions. I wish we got a ton more at CPSC. Read into that what you will. If you've got great ideas, I look at those extraordinarily closely. And so that's one way.
That.
I know you did. And so saferproducts.gov, again, any individual incidents with these things, even if you don't think it's that big of a deal, put it in there. It helps us start tracking these things. It builds the case for why we might need to do something. So just communicate. And we're a small agency. You can email the commissioners over here and we'll probably take a meeting. So.
All right. Well, thank you. I know we went over. I'm sorry, Mimi. I just want to thank all of you, Achla and Richard and Bonnie, so much for joining us, for all of this great information. And I hope we'll continue the conversations and the work and the citizens petitions even. So thank you very much for joining us.